Hey, tonight we're exploring why Pluto is no longer called a planet. Though in truth, the story feels less like a demotion and more like a slow drifting away. You picture it now, far beyond the warm reach of the sun, where the light is no brighter than a pale star. A tiny, icy world turns slowly in the dark. Its surface gleams in faint tones of cream and gold, with patches of shadowed ice stretching for hundreds of miles. Here, the silence is so deep you can almost hear your own thoughts, as if the vacuum itself has a voice you just haven't learned to understand. You probably won't survive this world unchanged, but that's the point. So before you get too comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you enjoy quiet stories like this. If you're still awake after we're done, leave a comment with your location and your local time. It's always curious to see how far these stories travel. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You start your mental journey by stepping past the orbit of Neptune, farther than even the faintest outer planets you've known since childhood. Out here, distances lose their meaning. The sun is reduced to a golden pinprick. You've read that it takes over 5 hours for light itself to travel from there to here, the kind of delay that turns every exchange into a slow, thoughtful conversation with the universe. Pluto, when you find it, doesn't announce itself. It's small, barely 2/3 the size of Earth's moon. And yet it holds a strange gravity over your thoughts, pulling at them with the quiet confidence of something that doesn't need to prove itself. One fascinating fact rises gently into your mind. When Clyde Tombaugh discovered Pluto in 1930, he wasn't even searching for this world. He had been hunting for Planet X, a hypothetical giant that might explain odd wobbles in Neptune's orbit. Instead, he spotted a faint, moving point of light on photographic plates, a ghost among the fixed stars. And here's an eerie detail. If you could stand on Pluto's surface during its long winter, you might never see the sun rise for decades. Each season, there can last more than 60 Earth years. Imagine living in twilight so long that you'd forget what shadows look like in midday brightness. It's easy to forget how much of human history has unfolded without anyone knowing Pluto existed. Every piece of literature you've read from before 1930, every painting, every song, they all imagined a solar system that ended with Neptune. In a way, Pluto's discovery subtly reshaped humanity's mental map of existence. You might wonder if that's why people became so attached to it, because it expanded the known edges of our home. You let that thought settle as the scene in your mind shifts. You picture a dim observatory, snow piled against the outer walls, and Clyde Tombaugh hunched over a blinking comparison viewer, flipping between photographic plates. It's an almost meditative act, the kind where minutes melt into hours. Then, there it is. A tiny dot moved just enough from one plate to the next to hint at life, or at least motion. That flicker is Pluto's entrance into human awareness. Researchers still wonder what might have happened if Tombaugh had missed it. Would someone else have spotted it years later? Would its discovery have landed differently in a world already brimming with scientific advances? Or would Pluto have remained anonymous, circling quietly at the edge of everything? You drift above Pluto now, looking down at its pale, uneven surface. Craters and ridges tell you it has been struck countless times by other wanderers from the Kuiper Belt. There's no sound here, not even the faintest whisper of wind, just the motion of ice crystals sublimating under the thin sunlight, rising into a fragile, temporary sky. As you float, your thoughts return to how this world, so small and distant, once held the same official title as Earth or Jupiter. And though that title has since been taken away, you realize that the ice and rock beneath you have not changed. Pluto doesn't know or care what humans call it. It simply turns slowly, patiently, on its tilted axis, under the dim watch of a sun too far to warm it. You begin to feel the way this place stretches your sense of time. Its orbit is so long that since its discovery, Pluto has not even made one complete trip around the sun. That trip takes 248 Earth years. It feels less like a year here and more like a lifetime, maybe several lifetimes. The scale of it makes you pause. You think of all the human generations that will pass before Pluto returns to the same place in its orbit. Somewhere deep in the dark, you sense that its story is already much older than our definitions and debates. You can almost hear it breathing under the ice, holding on to its own pace, waiting for the next slow visitor to come along and see it for what it is. You let the image of Pluto's frozen plains linger in your mind, and then, slowly, the scene shifts. You're no longer in the quiet void above it. Instead, you're in a warmer, earthbound memory. An old office with stacks of books leaning at impossible angles, the smell of dust and ink filling the air. A letter lies open on a desk, and in it is the name that would echo through classrooms and coffee table conversations for nearly a century. Pluto. The year is 1930. A fresh discovery is still settling into the minds of astronomers. Clyde Tombaugh's announcement has traveled quickly across newspapers, but there is something missing. A name. You imagine a small ripple of excitement flowing through the scientific community, not unlike the moment a newborn child is held for the first time. This tiny world at the edge of the solar system has no voice yet, no label to give it form in the human imagination. The suggestion comes from far away, from an 11-year-old girl named Venetia Burney in Oxford, England. You picture her at a breakfast table, a light drizzle outside, her mind already dancing through the myths and stories she has read. She knows Pluto is the Roman god of the underworld, a fitting guardian for such a dark and distant realm. She says the name out loud to her grandfather, and it carries enough quiet authority to travel all the way to Lowell Observatory. One fascinating fact drifts through your thoughts. Venetia's suggestion didn't just resonate because of its mythological weight. It also fit neatly into the tradition of naming planets after Roman deities. And perhaps most charmingly for astronomers at Lowell, the first two letters matched Percival Lowell's initials, the man whose observatory led the search. You can see the eerie coincidence in it, how a child with no grand intentions reached across oceans and found the exact syllables that would settle into history. It's almost as if the name had been waiting, patient and unclaimed, for someone with just the right mixture of curiosity and timing to speak it. Researchers still wonder whether another name might have shifted public perception. Would Minerva or Atlas, both considered at the time, have carried the same shadowy allure? Would Pluto have felt less like an enigmatic recluse and more like a mythic hero? The identity of a place can be shaped by so little. A sound, a story, a letter from one child to the right ears. You let your imagination stretch further. The moment the name was chosen, it began to work its way into atlases, science magazines, and even popular culture. By the late 1930s, Pluto appeared on planetary charts with the same casual certainty as Mars or Saturn. In people's minds, the solar system now had 9 members, a perfect round number. And it's funny how much comfort humans find in round numbers, as if the universe itself appreciates neatness. Outside that neatness, Pluto was already an oddity. It had an unusually tilted and elongated orbit. Sometimes, for years at a time, it even drifted closer to the Sun than Neptune. Yet its smallness and its quirks didn't diminish its place in the cosmic family, at least not yet. You picture a child in the 1960s, lying on the carpet, tracing a finger along the colorful arc of Pluto's path on a poster. To them, it is simply the last planet, a tiny but essential part of the solar system's edge. An unusual, almost eerie detail rises up. Pluto's naming happened just months before Clyde Tombaugh's own father died. There's no clear connection, but you imagine how this bittersweet overlap might have pressed a faint fingerprint of emotion onto the moment, a discovery tinged with both arrival and loss. You think of Venetia again, decades later, long after Pluto's name became famous. She once said she didn't feel ownership over the name, only quiet satisfaction. That's the nature of certain ideas. They outgrow the people who first spoke them. They become untethered, like small planets themselves, drifting into the public's collective mind. The image around you softens. You're back in the dim reach of the outer solar system, the name Pluto written across the frozen world below in your mind's eye. It's strange to realize how quickly a place can feel like it has always existed, once it has a name. Without it, Pluto might have stayed just a dot in astronomical ledgers, known only by catalog numbers. With it, it became a story, and stories are far harder to let go of. As your thoughts quiet, you feel yourself orbiting not just the world itself, but its identity, the name that once carried it proudly into the lineup of planets. And even though the title has changed, the name endures. Out here, names have their own kind of gravity. They bind memories together, anchoring them against the slow erosion of time. You let the name Pluto linger like a soft echo in your mind, and when the sound fades, you find yourself somewhere familiar. Not in the cold expanse of the Kuiper Belt, but in a classroom from decades past. The air smells faintly of chalk dust. A wall map of the solar system stretches across the front of the room. The colors faded from years of sunlight through tall windows. There it is, at the very end of the chart, a tiny, pale blue circle, its name printed neatly underneath, Pluto. You're not sure whose memory this is, maybe your own, maybe borrowed from countless others, but it's vivid. The teacher traces a finger along the planets, starting with Mercury, swift and sun-baked, all the way out to Neptune, then tapping that small dot beyond. The 9th planet. No one questions it. It sits there with quiet authority, as if it has always belonged. A fascinating fact drifts into place. For much of the 20th century, the known planets fit neatly into a tidy 9-member family. Pluto was the smallest, yes, but still counted, still dignified by the same title as Jupiter and Earth. Even though its mass is barely 1/6 that of our moon, textbooks rarely dwelled on its limitations. Instead, they presented it as the mysterious outsider, the strange and lonely guardian of the solar system's edge. You remember, or imagine, a child tracing Pluto's long eccentric orbit in a science book. It stretches far from the sun, then dips inside Neptune's path for a few decades before retreating again into the dark. An orbit like that feels more like a secret passage than a circle. There's an eerie, almost melancholy detail about those old diagrams. They were simplifications, of course. The distances between planets weren't to scale. If they had been, Pluto's dot would be so far from the rest of the chart, you'd need another wall entirely. The illusion of closeness in those images made it feel like a tight-knit family, when in truth, Pluto lived far from everyone else. You drift deeper into this remembered classroom. You can hear the slow hum of a projector warming up, see a slide flicker to life with grainy photographs of Pluto, or at least what was thought to be Pluto. Before 2015, no spacecraft had been there. Every image was just a blurred smudge of light, and somehow that made it more alluring. The less you could see, the more your mind could wander. Researchers still wonder whether Pluto's place in culture was more about its reality or its mystery. After all, the facts we had were sparse, small, icy, far away. But in the gaps between those facts, imagination bloomed. It became the romantic loner, the distant wanderer, the last stop before the void. You recall, or perhaps invent, the moment a child in that room raised a hand and asked, "Has anyone been there?" The teacher smiled softly and shook her head. Not yet. Maybe someday. That promise hung in the air like a star that would never fall, but might someday be caught. There's something in the way humans fill in the unknown with story. A blurry photograph becomes a landscape. A number on a chart becomes a cold, windswept plain. And a tiny planet on the edge of a map becomes a symbol of limits reached and boundaries crossed. You let the classroom fade, the desks dissolving into darkness, the map rolling itself up into the shadows. Once again, you are floating in the silence beyond Neptune. You see Pluto not as a dot, but as a place. Mountains of frozen water taller than the Rockies, vast plains of nitrogen ice, and a thin atmosphere that freezes and falls as snow when it drifts too far from the sun. These were not in those old textbooks, but somehow you feel they were always there, waiting for the day someone would arrive to see them. It's strange to think of how confident those classroom charts were. 9 planets, no more, no less. The edges of the solar system neatly labeled. And yet, beyond that tiny circle, there was already an ocean of unknown, countless icy bodies waiting silently in the Kuiper Belt. The map was never complete, but it felt whole because Pluto was there at the end, holding the edge together. And so, for decades, that's how you carried it in your mind. The 9th planet, the guardian of the frontier, the final bead on a thread of worlds strung out from the sun. You didn't yet know that definitions could change or that titles could be taken away. You didn't yet know that even in the vast stillness of space, nothing stays the same forever. The classroom map rolls away in your mind, and you drift forward in time into an era when quiet changes are already beginning beneath the surface. Pluto still rests at the edge of the charts, still a planet in every textbook. But in the minds of some astronomers, a shift is forming. Not a sudden decision, not a public debate yet. More like the slow gathering of clouds before anyone notices the sky has dimmed. You find yourself in the company of scientists at conferences in the late 20th century. Their conversations are polite, unhurried, but there's a subtle restlessness in their questions. Pluto, they note, is smaller than 7 of the solar system's moons. It travels in an orbit tilted and stretched compared to the others. And beyond it, telescopes are beginning to glimpse strange moving specks, other icy bodies in the darkness. A fascinating fact stirs in your mind. In 1992, astronomers discovered the first confirmed Kuiper Belt object, apart from Pluto and its moon Charon. It was called 1992 QB1, an unassuming label for something that quietly changed the shape of the solar system in human thought. If Pluto was just one among many such icy wanderers, perhaps it wasn't quite the singular frontier we imagined. You picture an eerie scene, a research team in a dim observatory dome, scanning a computer display where distant points of light are traced and cataloged. Some of these dots are hundreds of kilometers across, big enough to rival Pluto itself. Their orbits weave through the same distant region, and for the first time, Pluto looks less like a solitary king and more like a member of a vast, cold archipelago. Researchers still wonder whether this was the moment the question became inevitable. If Pluto is a planet, then should we call all these others planets too? Or, if not, what makes Pluto different from them? The definition of planet, once taken for granted, had never been formally fixed. It had been more a tradition than a rule, passed quietly from one generation to the next. You sense how such a question could linger in the air for years without resolution. Science often moves like this, slowly, quietly, until a tipping point arrives. And while the public still spoke of 9 planets without hesitation, among astronomers, the need for a clear definition was becoming harder to ignore. It's almost ironic. Pluto's discovery had once expanded the solar system in human eyes. Now, new discoveries were threatening to expand it far beyond what anyone had imagined. Dozens, maybe hundreds of planets if Pluto's title were to remain intact. And the more it expanded, the more that word, planet, began to lose its shape. You find yourself floating again above Pluto's surface, looking out into the dark. There's nothing here to mark these boundaries. No invisible line in space separates planet from not planet. The distinctions live entirely in human language and agreement, fragile as frost. Out here, every world simply is. You drift toward Charon, Pluto's largest moon, so large that some astronomers once considered the pair a double planet. They spin around a shared center of gravity that lies outside Pluto's surface, a celestial dance unlike anything in the inner solar system. You imagine looking back from Charon's surface, seeing Pluto hanging in the black sky, close enough to show its heart-shaped planes in sharp detail. The more you see, the more the coming debate feels strange. How could something so real, so intricate, be redefined away? But that is the quiet truth. Reality doesn't change when definitions do. The only thing that shifts is the way humans place it in the story of the cosmos. And so the scientists' quiet questions grow heavier. More Kuiper Belt objects are found. Some are icy twins. Some are darker. Some larger than Pluto. The line between what counts as a planet and what doesn't begins to blur, like the fading edges of a shadow at dusk. You picture a not-so-distant meeting room where researchers sip coffee and talk over possible criteria. Mass, orbit, the ability to clear a path through space. Words are tested and set aside. It's not yet the famous decision of 2006, just the soft beginning of a conversation that will eventually touch every schoolchild's textbook. From here, floating in the deep, you sense how delicate it all is. The titles we give to worlds are like labels on jars in a vast, unlit pantry, useful for finding our way, but meaningless to the jars themselves. Pluto spins on, unaware, the slow arc of its year, carrying it patiently through a darkness humans are only beginning to map. You remain adrift among the quiet stars. But now your mind glides toward a gathering that will crystallize years of questions into something tangible. It's August 2006, and in Prague, the International Astronomical Union, a soft-spoken crowd of scientists from around the world, meets to decide, at last, what a planet actually is. The room isn't charged with drama. There are no slammed doors, no thunderclaps of decision. Instead, the pace is slow, almost meditative. The conversation loops in circles, as definitions tend to do. Words are proposed, weighed, and gently set aside. Each attempt tries to be exact, yet flexible enough to hold the solar system as we understand it. A quietly fascinating fact rises to the surface. Before this meeting, the term planet had no strict scientific definition. It was an inherited concept, handed down from ancient observers who counted wandering lights in the sky. Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn. Those first five were planets to the ancients because they moved against the backdrop of stars. Uranus and Neptune joined later, with the help of telescopes. Pluto slipped in almost by instinct, without anyone stopping to codify why. You can almost see the scene in Prague, not grand speeches, but a kind of patient weaving of thoughts. The members agree there must be three criteria. The first, a planet must orbit the sun. The second, it must have enough mass for gravity to pull it into a nearly round shape. And the third, the one that will become the quiet edge of the blade, it must have cleared its orbital neighborhood of other debris. There's something faintly eerie about that third rule. It's as if each planet must prove dominance in its cosmic lane, sweeping away rivals over billions of years. Earth, for example, has done this. Nothing of comparable size shares its path. Pluto, however, moves through a crowd, icy neighbors in the Kuiper Belt that it cannot remove, only coexist with. Researchers still wonder if this clearing the neighborhood rule is the perfect measure. After all, in the far reaches of the solar system, distances stretch into light hours, and clearing space becomes a relative notion. But for the moment, it is enough to settle the question at hand. The definition, when read aloud, feels almost like a charm. A planet is a celestial body that A, orbits the sun, B, has sufficient mass for its self-gravity to overcome rigid body forces so that it assumes a nearly round shape, and C, has cleared the neighborhood around its orbit. You drift as the words settle, like dust in a still room. By these measures, Pluto satisfies the first two conditions, but fails the third. Not because it's flawed, not because it's unworthy, but because it simply shares too much space with others. The moment isn't explosive. The Earth does not tilt. But quietly, a new category is born: dwarf planets. A term that sounds almost affectionate, though it's meant to be precise. Pluto is moved there, joined by others like Ceres and Eris, the latter being the icy body whose discovery pressed this decision into existence. There's a gentle strangeness in imagining this. A single paragraph of text in a formal document, crafted by a few hundred people in a conference hall, reshaping the mental universe of millions. You can almost hear the sound of it, not a bang, but the soft shuffle of a title sliding from one drawer to another. You think about how the ancients, gazing up without telescopes, would never have imagined such a debate. To them, naming was as simple as pointing and watching a light wander against the stars. But here in this quiet meeting, the definition of planet has become something like a mirror, showing us as much about how humans categorize the world as it does about the worlds themselves. Somewhere far away, Pluto spins on, sunlight falling faint and blue on its nitrogen plains. It doesn't know about the meeting in Prague. It doesn't know that on Earth, strangers are gently deciding it is no longer a planet. And you, drifting here with it, can't help but feel the smallness of such labels against the vastness of space. The decision, once made, is not universal in its reception. Some astronomers dissent, others shrug and move on. Outside the scientific world, the news will travel slowly, then all at once. But that is another current, one you will drift into later. For now, here in the soft echo of the conference hall, the three rules rest in place like stones laid into a riverbed, the water of thought flowing around them. And beyond Pluto's orbit, unseen in this moment, more icy worlds wait. The definition will hold for now. But definitions like orbits can shift. You stay with that third rule a while longer, letting it unfurl in your thoughts. Clear its orbit. The phrase sounds so simple, like sweeping a floor, but in the context of planets, it means something vast. The quiet assertion of gravity over billions of years. A planet's dominance is not declared. It's earned slowly by gathering some neighbors and flinging others away into deep space. You imagine Pluto's path around the sun. It is long and stretched, tilted at an angle to the rest of the solar system, like a ribbon of frost wound differently from the others. And along that ribbon, Pluto is never alone. Thousands of icy bodies, comets in waiting, rocky shards, and other frozen spheres drift with it. This is the Kuiper Belt, a sprawling, half-forgotten frontier. A quietly fascinating fact comes to mind. If you could shrink the solar system so that Earth's orbit fit inside the circle of a dinner plate, the Kuiper Belt would be a wide ring of powdered sugar extending far beyond, with countless specks glinting in the dim light. Pluto is one of those specks, slightly larger than many, far smaller than some once suspected, and unable to command the space around it. You can almost see the ballet of bodies there. They cross and recross paths, sometimes in perfect resonance, like Pluto's dance with Neptune. Every time Pluto approaches, Neptune is already elsewhere, their orbits in a long-standing rhythm that keeps them from ever colliding. It's a cosmic courtesy, but it also means Pluto doesn't push Neptune aside, nor anything else in the Kuiper Belt. There's something faintly eerie about this harmony. It feels less like dominance and more like coexistence. A quiet agreement among ice-bound travelers to keep moving together through the dark. Researchers still wonder if clearing the orbit is truly fair for worlds so far from the sun. The distances are so immense that gravitational influence weakens. Even mighty Neptune hasn't truly cleared its zone of small debris. But compared to Pluto, its reign is still overwhelming. In the end, it's a question of scale, and Pluto's scale is simply too small. Your thoughts drift to the mathematics of it. Astronomers use something called the planetary discriminant, a ratio that compares a body's mass to the total mass of other objects in its orbit. Earth's ratio is huge, billions of times larger than the stray dust and rocks around it. Pluto's? It's tiny, barely distinguishable from the rest. By that measure, it isn't a solitary monarch, but part of a crowd. And yet, that crowd is beautiful. You picture sunlight filtering through the thin haze of Pluto's atmosphere, touching the nearby surfaces of other Kuiper Belt objects, each with its own shape, history, and secrets. Being part of many, rather than ruling alone, gives Pluto a strange kind of belonging. Back on Earth, though, definitions care about thresholds. They care about whether the orbit is cleared enough to match the other 8 planets. By that metric, Pluto's soft dance among companions marks it as different. And so the third rule becomes the one it cannot meet. You think about how, for billions of years, Pluto has traveled this way, unchanged by human eyes or words. The reclassification didn't alter its path, didn't erase its mountains of water ice or its vast pale heart. Only our categories shifted, and only here, in the minds of those who name things. There's a quiet irony in this. The idea that a world can fail a test it never knew existed, a rule written billions of kilometers away. The solar system doesn't grade itself, it spins on. It's only us who hold the scorecards, and sometimes change the scoring after the game has long been underway. Still, you let your mind drift with Pluto's gentle rhythm. You imagine riding alongside it for one full orbit, 248 Earth years to complete a single loop around the sun. In that time, empires would rise and fall, languages would shift, continents would change in ways subtle and grand. But Pluto's companions in the Kuiper Belt would still be there, slow-moving, faintly lit, keeping the same ancient pace. You're not in a hurry here. The darkness feels vast but not empty, like the pause between heartbeats. The icy bodies around you have their own stories, ones no reclassification could diminish. Far away, the definition in Prague sits still on paper. Closer, you can almost hear Pluto's surface winds, if they exist at all, moving grains of nitrogen ice from one place to another. You're not sure if it's clearing anything, but it's certainly reshaping itself in its own quiet way. The third rule may seem like the smallest of the three, but it's the one that most sharply divides what is planet and what is dwarf planet. It's the line Pluto cannot cross, and yet from here it looks less like a line and more like a suggestion, one that could be erased or redrawn with a single meeting, if humans ever chose to. You wonder, not urgently, but with the same slow curiosity that drifts between stars, if someday another body will arrive in our awareness, so strange and borderline that we'll have to rewrite the rules again. You stay here, in the outer dark, long enough for your eyes to adjust, if eyes could adjust to distances this wide. Around Pluto, the Kuiper Belt stretches in every direction, a scattering of icy worlds that never grew into planets. Some are oddly shaped, like misshapen snowballs. Others are round enough to hold their own gravity and balance, their surfaces crusted with frozen methane or water ice. It's a quiet neighborhood, but not empty. In fact, the Kuiper Belt may contain hundreds of thousands of objects larger than a few dozen kilometers across, and millions of smaller fragments. They drift slowly, bound by the sun's faint pull, in orbits tilted and twisted like tangled threads. Here, clearing your orbit isn't just difficult, it might be impossible. A quietly fascinating fact comes to you. Some Kuiper Belt objects follow orbital patterns that keep them in perfect time with Neptune, like Pluto does. These resonances act like cosmic traffic agreements, ensuring certain bodies never meet directly. It's a kind of order in the chaos, and it means that in this region, companionship is more common than isolation. You picture Pluto moving among its peers. Charon, its largest moon, is always near, locked in a mutual rotation so that each shows the same face to the other. The two bodies almost seem like a double world, circling a shared point in space. Around them, smaller moons, Nix, Hydra, Kerberos, and Styx, keep their own delicate paths. It's not the entourage of a ruling planet, but the close-knit company of a wanderer. There's an eerie beauty in thinking of them all here, far beyond where sunlight feels warm. Every object is lit only faintly, the sun just another bright star among many. In this dimness, worlds don't cast sharp shadows. Instead, they glow with a kind of muted persistence. Astronomers still debate just how far the Kuiper Belt extends, and whether it's truly distinct from the scattered disk beyond, another region of icy bodies with even wilder orbits. The truth may be that these categories blend, the way ocean shallows blend into deeper waters without a single clear line. You reflect on how easy it is for humans to imagine the solar system as tidy, 8 planets, neat ellipses, a clear edge somewhere out there. But this place defies tidiness. It's more like a slow snowfall that never melts, each flake on its own path, the whole scene drifting forever. You follow one of these smaller bodies in your mind, perhaps Haumea, with its elongated shape and strange, rapid spin. It's one of the Kuiper Belt's largest residents, icy and bright, surrounded by its own moons. Then Mechamake drifts into view, reddish and distant, another reminder that Pluto is part of a family, not an exception. From a certain point of view, this should be comforting. Pluto isn't alone. It belongs to something vast, a whole region named and mapped because of it. But from another angle, this is exactly why it lost its planetary status. Its similarity to so many others forced astronomers to reconsider whether it should be in a separate category at all. Here, among all these icy wanderers, the concept of planet feels almost arbitrary. No one here is trying to rule the rest. No one is clearing their orbit. They're just moving together, year after impossible year. You imagine the sound of it. If sound could carry through the vacuum, the slow churn of bodies through space, the whisper of dust grains brushing past one another, it would be less like a symphony and more like a low, endless hum. The Kuiper Belt doesn't care about titles. It's content to keep drifting at the edge of sunlight, holding its treasures in the cold. Some are as small as a pebble in your hand. Some, like Pluto, are large enough to have their own geology, their own thin atmospheres, their own stories etched into surface scars and color shifts. You think of how each of these worlds must look up close. Craters from ancient impacts, mountains of rock-hard ice, perhaps subsurface oceans locked away under kilometers of frost. Each has been shaped by a history too long for human calendars to hold. And somewhere in that quiet crowd, Pluto moves along its tilted path. It doesn't lead, and it doesn't follow. It simply keeps time with the rest, a member of this frozen chorus, carrying its heart-shaped glacier like a soft signal that even here, beauty can bloom. You let the scene fade, but not completely. Just enough that it feels like you could return to it anytime, like a dream you know how to find again. In the midst of this frozen company, there comes a moment when one more voice joins the chorus, and it changes everything. You imagine the scene in 2005, though it didn't happen all at once. Observatories quietly tracking a distant point of light, night after night, confirming that it's not a background star, not an artifact, but a moving world. The object is given a provisional name, 2003 UB3 It lies even farther from the Sun than Pluto, its path stretched into an elongated ellipse that takes it hundreds of years to complete a single orbit. It is, in time, named Eris, after the Greek goddess of strife and discord. The choice is a small irony, because Eris is about to cause both in the astronomical world. Eris is nearly the same size as Pluto, perhaps slightly larger, perhaps slightly smaller. Measurements shift as more data comes in. But the fact is undeniable. Here's another icy body in the Kuiper Belt, every bit as complex in its orbit and scale as Pluto itself. A quietly fascinating fact slips into your thoughts. Eris reflects more sunlight than freshly fallen snow. Its surface is coated in a frosty layer of methane ice, making it one of the brightest objects in the solar system when viewed from Earth. You picture it as a white shard glinting faintly in the darkness, spinning slowly, a tiny distant mirror catching the sun's last reach. Astronomers are faced with a problem. If Pluto is a planet, shouldn't Eris be one too? And if Eris is a planet, what about Haumea? What about make? How many planets will the textbooks need to list? The question is not just about names, it's about the framework we use to understand the solar system. There's something eerie in this moment, like the instant a long accepted map starts to blur at the edges. The neat diagram of 9 planets suddenly seems incomplete or misleading, the lines between categories fading. You imagine old posters curling on classroom walls, the printed list of planets suddenly feeling provisional, not permanent. Researchers still wonder if the timing made the debate sharper. The discovery of Eris came during a period when technology was revealing more of the Kuiper Belt than ever before. New digital imaging techniques, powerful survey telescopes, and careful comparisons of sky photographs meant that dozens of distant worlds were being spotted, some only slightly smaller than Pluto. It becomes clear, if the definition of planet stays broad enough to include Pluto, then dozens, maybe hundreds of other bodies might qualify. And that would transform the solar system's portrait into something far more crowded than most people had ever imagined. You drift into a moment of reflection. Is this really a problem? Would it be so wrong to have 100 planets? To let the list grow and grow until it mirrors the complexity of what's out there? Perhaps it would simply force us to abandon the idea that the solar system can be held in a tidy mnemonic, recited from memory like a short poem. But in the minds of many astronomers, there is value in clarity, in drawing a boundary that separates planets from other kinds of worlds. The arrival of Eris pushes this question into the open, and the conversation begins to gather momentum. You picture the two worlds, Pluto and Eris, drifting in their distant orbits, unaware of the debate they've inspired. Eris moves through space with a long, slow patience, carrying its small moon dysnomia like a secret. Pluto continues its path among the resonances with Neptune, Charon still close beside it. Neither will meet the other. In the real distances of the solar system, they might as well be in different seas. And yet, in human minds, they are placed side by side, compared in size, brightness, distance. It's as if two shells have been picked up from the same beach, their patterns and textures examined under lamplight. Eris, with its name rooted in discord, does what myths say it should. It unsettles the order of things. Not by malice, not by intention, but simply by existing. You imagine the stillness of its surface, where the sun is a pinprick and temperatures plunge to depths that make even nitrogen turn to frost. No winds to speak of, no sound, just a frozen calm. Yet here, in the imaginations of those who study it, is the quiet storm that will end Pluto's era as a planet. For now, though, Eris remains far away, moving along its vast elliptical loop. The arguments it has sparked will be settled, or at least formalized, in a meeting of minds. But out here, in the dark beyond Neptune, there's no hurry. The ice keeps its grip, the sunlight barely touches the ground, and two distant worlds continue on their patient paths, not caring what they're called. You sense the shift beginning not with thunder or any dramatic proclamation, but in a quiet conference room in Prague in the summer of 2006. Outside, the air is warm, the cobblestone streets busy with tourists. Inside, the International Astronomical Union's General Assembly carries on, a gathering of hundreds of astronomers from around the world. The debate that had been building for months, maybe years, is now a set of papers, proposed definitions, and long, deliberate discussions. This isn't a sudden coup against Pluto. It's more like the slow turning of a tide, one whose arrival had been inevitable ever since Eris entered the conversation. The vote is not an emotional spectacle. The speeches are measured, the questions technical. The criteria are examined again. Must orbit the sun. Must be massive enough for gravity to shape it into a sphere. Must have cleared its orbit of other debris. The third rule, that quiet, almost bureaucratic sounding condition, becomes the point on which Pluto's status rests. And here, by the math of celestial mechanics, Pluto falters. Its gravitational reach is not strong enough to sweep its orbital zone clean. Icy bodies drift along the same path, sharing space like slow companions on the same dim highway. It's a quietly fascinating fact. If you could line up all the material in Pluto's orbit besides Pluto itself, the total mass would be far greater than the planet's own. In a sense, Pluto is not the sole ruler of its region. It's just one among many. The announcement comes in the way scientific decisions often do, a formal statement, voted on, recorded, and released. Pluto is now classified as a dwarf planet, a new category designed to hold worlds like it, spherical, small, and unable to dominate their orbital neighborhoods. There's something eerie about how swiftly the change moves through human spaces. Textbooks, museum plaques, school posters, all adjusted, sometimes within weeks. The solar system shrinks on paper. A neat list of 9 becomes 8. In classrooms, teachers explain to puzzled faces why the familiar order has shifted. Some students are too young to feel the difference. Others feel like something solid has been taken away. Researchers still wonder if the definition could have gone another way. Some argue the clearing the orbit rule is unfair to smaller worlds, especially ones far from the sun where orbital clearing takes longer. Others feel that leaving the definition looser would dilute the term planet until it no longer conveyed anything distinct. You picture Pluto in this moment, though of course, nothing about its reality changes. The nitrogen glaciers still stretch across its surface. The thin atmosphere still freezes and thaws with the seasons. Charon still pulls at it in a locked rotation. The demotion is a human construct, an adjustment in language, not in nature. And yet words shape how we think. For decades, Pluto had been part of the planetary family, an endpoint in the litany. Mercury, Venus, Earth, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, Pluto. To remove it is to break a rhythm. There's an odd stillness in imagining this. The image of a name being quietly lifted out of a row, leaving a space that isn't quite empty because the object itself remains, but which nonetheless changes the symmetry of the pattern. Public reaction ranges from mild bemusement to heartfelt protest. Petitions are signed. T-shirts are printed. When I was your age, we had 9 planets. Late-night hosts joke about Pluto being fired. But beneath the humor is a small thread of resistance, the sense that some part of a shared story has been altered without our consent. You drift into the thought of how fragile our categories are. Planet is a word humans made, applied to a variety of worlds over centuries, its meaning shifting as knowledge expanded. Once, the moon and the sun were planets. Once, Ceres was a planet. Before it too was reclassified as something smaller, an echo of Pluto's fate. This moment in 2006 is not the first redefinition, and it won't be the last. But for those alive to watch it unfold, there is a sense of watching a familiar landmark vanish into a fog. You imagine Pluto now, far out beyond Neptune, still tracing its tilted, elongated path around the sun, still bound by the same laws of gravity as ever. The vote in Prague changes nothing about its icy heart or its frozen plains. But in the minds of the people who chart the heavens, a door has closed. And yet, even in its new category, Pluto remains the most famous of the dwarf planets, a kind of quiet royalty among its peers. Names like Eris, Haumea, and Makemake will not be remembered by as many, but Pluto's will endure. In that endurance, perhaps there's something even more mysterious: the way a world can lose its title, yet keep its hold on the human imagination. You picture yourself gliding slowly across the black gulf toward a tiny sphere that hangs in the darkness like a pale ember. No fanfare greets you. No great storms rage. Only the soft, cold shimmer of reflected sunlight touching craters, plains, and mountains that have been frozen in place for billions of years. Pluto, even stripped of its planetary title, feels ancient and dignified. You draw nearer, and the first thing your eyes follow is a bright, heart-shaped region stretched across the surface. It isn't just a trick of light. It is a vast glacier of nitrogen ice, hundreds of miles across. Its name, Tombaugh Regio, honors the man who first spotted Pluto in 1930. One lobe of the heart is smoother, younger, as though it has been refreshed by some hidden activity beneath the crust. It's a quietly fascinating fact. Temperatures here average around 375 degrees Fahrenheit, cold enough that nitrogen, a gas on Earth, lies frozen solid under your imagined feet. When the distant sun warms Pluto ever so slightly in its 248-year orbit, this nitrogen can sublimate into gas, creating a whisper-thin atmosphere. And as Pluto travels away again, the air freezes back onto the surface, like frost returning to a window pane. There's an eerie stillness in this cycle, as if the entire world is breathing so slowly you could stand here for days without noticing the inhale or exhale. The atmosphere itself is tinted faintly blue, a haze of microscopic particles catching the light in a way that feels almost like twilight, no matter the hour. Charon, Pluto's largest moon, hovers close in the blackness, locked in a kind of eternal gaze. The two worlds are tidally locked, always showing the same face to each other. From the right vantage point, you'd never see Charon move. It would just hang there in the same spot in the sky, a reminder that Pluto is not truly alone. You let your eyes wander to the jagged edges of water ice mountains. Mountains higher than the Rockies, made not of stone, but of the same material that makes up the ice cubes in a kitchen glass. Here, though, the ice is harder than rock would be on Earth, strengthened by the intense cold. These ranges are young in geological terms, suggesting that Pluto's surface has been reshaped, maybe even recently. Researchers still wonder how such activity can persist on a small frozen world so far from the sun. Perhaps heat from radioactive decay deep within keeps parts of Pluto's interior warmer than expected. Perhaps there is a buried ocean beneath the ice, locked away from space by miles of frozen shell. If so, it would be an ocean in permanent darkness, a place that could, in theory, harbor life. Though we have no evidence yet, the thought lingers in you. Even in places that seem still and dead, there might be hidden motion, hidden warmth. The surface you imagine walking upon could be the lid to something more alive than it appears. In the quieter corners of Pluto, darker patches hint at complex organic molecules, tholins, formed by sunlight and cosmic rays striking methane ice. They give the world subtle reddish-brown hues, as if it's been dusted with rust. These tholins aren't life, but on Earth, such molecules are the kind of chemical precursors from which life can emerge. There's a kind of gentle irony in this, that Pluto, demoted in name, might still hold the raw materials of something profoundly important. Titles and categories have no bearing here. The ice doesn't know what the astronomers call this place. You wander further in your mind, imagining how the low gravity, about 6% of Earth's, would make each step a slow, floating arc. The silence would be complete. Your heartbeat would be louder in your ears than the sound of your boots touching the ice. And every so often, you'd glance up and see Charon, steady and unmoving, as though the sky itself has been pinned. Far beyond Charon's presence, the black curtain of space would carry the faint glimmers of other Kuiper Belt objects, silent companions in a cold, slow dance around the sun. Here at this distance, the sun is not the blazing disk you know, but a bright star, powerful still, yet lacking warmth. Somewhere inside, you feel the pull of this world's stubbornness. Demoted or not, Pluto persists in its long, eccentric orbit, keeping its secrets. It has survived impacts, endured deep freezes, carried on through billions of years without any need for human approval. You imagine turning slowly, the pale heart of Tombaugh Regio fading into shadow, the nitrogen ice reflecting that last faint glint of distant sunlight. It is a world still worth visiting, still worth knowing, perhaps even more so because it exists on the edges, where definitions blur and curiosity has to stretch farther to reach. And as you drift away again, that heart-shaped glacier lingers in your thoughts, like a quiet reminder that the worth of a thing does not depend on its title. You're still gliding in thought when a glint of human ingenuity appears at the edge of your vision. It is small, almost fragile looking, and yet it carries a kind of quiet certainty. This is the New Horizons spacecraft, launched from Earth in 2006, the year Pluto's status changed. By the time it reached Pluto, nearly a decade later, it had traveled more than 3 billion miles through the slow darkness, never once needing to stop for fuel, never once wavering from its path. You drift alongside it in your imagination, seeing its dish-shaped antenna pointed toward the faraway sun, and its gold-colored thermal insulation catching the light. It has no crew, no one to witness the moments directly, only instruments waiting to gather light and data and send them home. There's something quietly fascinating in the way New Horizons worked. It took 9.5 years to get to Pluto, passing Jupiter along the way for a gravity boost, stealing momentum from the giant planet to shave years off its journey. That kind of assist is like swinging past a moving train and letting it pull you forward, a silent handshake between worlds. When New Horizons finally approached Pluto in July 2015, it was moving faster than any other spacecraft ever sent from Earth. No orbit, no lingering. It would make a single fleeting pass, capturing as much as it could before the distance grew too vast again. You imagine this moment, the world growing larger in the camera's frame, from a blurry speck to a detailed sphere with patches of white, brown, and rust. The eerie detail comes in the timing. New Horizons had just one chance, a window of hours, to send back humanity's first close-up view. No second try. Every picture, every spectrum reading had to be perfect. If anything had gone wrong, an instrument failure, a software glitch, the closest look we'd ever have at Pluto might have been lost to the void. And yet, it worked. The images that returned showed a world far more complex than scientists had expected. Smooth plains of nitrogen ice, towering water ice mountains, strange dark streaks at the edges of glaciers. Even the faint haze of the atmosphere revealed itself in soft layers, each scattering sunlight in a slightly different way. It was a world alive with texture. Researchers still wonder how Pluto can be so geologically active at its size and distance from the sun. Small bodies usually cool quickly, losing the inner warmth that drives geological change. Pluto, somehow has kept moving parts, or has been warmed again and again by forces we don't yet understand. You picture yourself standing on that nitrogen plain as New Horizons passes overhead, too fast to hear, too far to see without instruments. It wouldn't cast a shadow here. You'd never know it had come. And yet, in that brief encounter, it captured more knowledge than all of human history had held about this place. When the spacecraft turned its antenna toward Earth to send the data, the signals traveled at the speed of light. But even so, they took over 4.5 hours to reach home. Imagine whispering to someone and not hearing their reply until half a day later. That's the kind of patience Pluto demands. The pictures appeared on screens around the world, and people leaned closer, as if the pixels might breathe. That pale heart-shaped glacier, the reddish cap at the pole, the shadowed craters, each detail was a revelation. Here was proof that even at the edge of the sun's light, beauty forms, patterns emerge, and worlds can still surprise us. New Horizons didn't stop at Pluto. After the flyby, it continued on into the Kuiper Belt, heading toward another small body, Arakoth, a contact binary shaped like a snowman, where it would arrive years later. It's still out there now, sending back what it can, its power slowly fading. One day it will fall silent, drifting endlessly between the stars. You let yourself imagine being that spacecraft, leaving a world behind forever, carrying its images like memories no one else can see firsthand. The sunlight grows fainter. The radio calls from Earth come less often. And yet, you keep moving forward into a quiet that is deeper than any found at home. Somewhere, far behind you, Pluto continues on its long, slow orbit. New Horizons has shown you its face, but never again will you be this close. The heart-shaped glacier, the blue-tinted haze, the reddish ice, they're already fading into memory. Still, the encounter has left a mark. You can feel it even now. The truth that some journeys are worth making, even for the briefest of meetings. That some worlds can change your sense of what's possible without ever speaking a word. The images of Pluto linger in your mind like the afterglow of a dream, vivid at first, then softening around the edges. You're not alone in feeling this. Around the world, people reacted to New Horizons discoveries in ways that seemed less like science and more like poetry. For some, Pluto's demotion had been a quiet insult, a theft of childhood certainty. It was the 9th planet in their old textbooks, the last stop in the solar system's familiar map. And suddenly, in 2006, it was told it no longer counted. You can still hear the echoes of disbelief in old news clips, voices laughing, voices protesting, voices mourning as if a friend had moved away. Even now, nearly 2 decades later, the emotional orbit of that decision hasn't decayed. For every person who shrugs and accepts the new definition, there's another who insists Pluto will always be a planet to them. It's curious, isn't it? How a frozen sphere 3 billion miles away can stir such a warm human response. You float in this feeling for a moment, tracing its origins. Humans have a habit of attaching stories to distant things, stars named for heroes, constellations drawn as animals that never walked the earth. The planets, too, wear myths like coats: Mars the warrior, Venus the goddess, Saturn the old keeper of time. Pluto, named for the god of the underworld, feels different. It was always small, always far, and perhaps that made it easier to imagine as a quiet, almost secret world. One quietly fascinating fact emerges as you think. In surveys conducted after Pluto's reclassification, more than half of respondents said that they opposed the change, even when they understood the scientific reasoning. The heart, it seems, has its own categories, and it doesn't always align with the rules written by astronomers. There's an eerie quality to the public's attachment, too. A reminder of how easily we anthropomorphize. Pluto became, in the minds of many, a sort of underdog, a small, overlooked traveler unfairly stripped of its title. In that light, the New Horizons images weren't just science, they were vindication. Here was Pluto, showing its beauty in defiance of being told it was less. Researchers still wonder how much public sentiment should matter in scientific classification. Should our emotional bonds to a world have any role in defining its category? Or should the lines be drawn with the cold precision of physics alone? The question remains open in quiet debates between astronomers and in the unspoken answers of millions who keep calling Pluto a planet anyway. You drift through memories of reactions that ranged from the solemn to the playful. Teachers wrote R.I.P. Pluto on classroom whiteboards. Cartoonists drew Pluto the dog shedding a single tear. Musicians slipped sly references into lyrics. The news cycle spun it as a culture war between nostalgia and science. But the truth, as you feel it now, is more delicate than that. Pluto's change of status was not a dismissal. It was an expansion of the solar system's story, an acknowledgement that there are many worlds out there of similar size and nature. In losing its exclusive title, Pluto gained a kind of kinship, a place among the dwarf planets of the Kuiper Belt, a family that had been hidden until we learned to look farther. Still, the emotional orbit loops back. You think of the pale heart-shaped region that New Horizons revealed, informally named Tombaugh Regio, after the man who discovered Pluto. That heart feels like an unspoken message, as if the world itself were reminding us that it still matters. You can almost imagine it beating slowly beneath the ice, sending a silent pulse out into the dark. You picture yourself standing under a clear night sky, knowing Pluto is somewhere out there beyond the reach of your eyes. Its presence is no less real for being unseen. The classification, the debate, the definitions, they're all human constructions. Pluto, indifferent to them, continues its 248-year journey around the sun. The emotional orbit of that knowledge is gentle but persistent. You feel the same pull that keeps so many from letting go of the ninth planet. It's not really about the label. It's about the reminder that even the smallest and most remote among us can leave a lasting mark on the heart. The voice is never truly quiet. You drift through a hall of echoes, where conversations about Pluto keep looping, slow, deliberate, but never ending. Some are spoken under the dim lights of conferences, where astronomers lean over coffee cups and argue gently about definitions. Others are whispered across dinner tables or murmured in online threads late at night. The debate is simple in its outline, but endlessly tangled in its details. Should Pluto still be called a planet? The International Astronomical Union says no. Their 2006 definition still stands. A planet must orbit the sun, be round from its own gravity, and clear its orbital path of other debris. Pluto fails that third rule. It shares its space with other icy bodies in the Kuiper Belt, hundreds, perhaps thousands of them. Yet some scientists point out that this rule isn't as neat as it sounds. Earth, for example, hasn't entirely cleared its own orbit. There are still near-Earth asteroids that cross its path. Jupiter, the largest planet of all, shares space with swarms of Trojan asteroids. By the strictest reading, even the biggest worlds might not be perfect under that law. This is where the conversations begin to branch into philosophy. You hear a quiet voice suggest that definitions in science are tools, not truths. They can be adjusted when they no longer serve. Another voice answers that definitions must be strict or they lose meaning entirely. Somewhere in the middle, the question hovers like a mote in a beam of starlight. How do we decide what belongs in a category when the universe offers no instructions? One quietly fascinating fact surfaces as you drift through these voices. In 2017, a group of NASA scientists proposed a new definition of planet that would have restored Pluto's status and included more than 100 other bodies in the solar system. Under their rules, a planet would simply be any round object in space that is not a star. It would make the word planet less exclusive, but perhaps more honest to the diversity of worlds we've found. There's something almost eerie about that thought. A solar system where planets are not a tidy family of 8, but a sprawling clan of small and large, icy and rocky, familiar and strange. A universe less like a museum display and more like a wilderness. Researchers still wonder whether such a change will ever happen. Will the IAU reconsider? Will public opinion sway the rules? Or will Pluto remain fixed in the smaller, lonelier category of dwarf planet forever? No one knows. And perhaps that's why the debate refuses to fade. It offers a safe cosmic mystery for people to argue about without urgency, a conversation as slow as Pluto's own orbit. You feel the pace of that orbit now, 248 Earth years for a single lap around the sun. A human life barely touches it. The last time Pluto was in the same place in its path, the French Revolution was beginning. The next time it will be here, the world will be centuries older. All the while, the question of its title might still be drifting from one mind to another, carried quietly across generations. The debate spills beyond science and into classrooms. Teachers, choosing between tradition and accuracy, sometimes still line Pluto up with the planets, if only to keep the mnemonic device, "My very educated mother just served us 9 pizzas" intact. Others end the phrase at nachos, leaving Pluto in the margins. You imagine the puzzled faces of students learning that not all adults agree on where the planets end. Somewhere in this gentle uncertainty lies the reason the argument feels alive. It's not about ice and rock and gravity alone. It's about the human need for order meeting the universe's tendency toward complication. And Pluto, small, far, and stubbornly beautiful, just happens to be where those two forces meet. You drift onward, the voices fading but never truly gone, like a faint signal from a distant world that keeps repeating itself across the void. You carry those fading voices with you, letting them settle somewhere quiet in your mind. The emptiness around you deepens, not as absence, but as a vast canvas, a place where thoughts can stretch without boundaries. Pluto becomes less a question of planet or not planet, and more a mirror for something else. Definitions, you realize, are human inventions. They are neat boxes we draw around pieces of the universe so we can talk about them. Sometimes they match the world perfectly. Sometimes they don't. And sometimes the act of drawing the box changes how we see what's inside. It's a quietly fascinating fact that the word planet itself comes from the Greek planetes, meaning wanderer. Ancient observers named them not for their size or shape, but because they drifted against the backdrop of fixed stars. By that definition, Pluto is as much a planet as any other. It wanders slowly through the black. But language has a way of shifting with knowledge, and the word now carries a weight it didn't thousands of years ago. An unusual image lingers in your mind, a small snow globe floating in space with Pluto suspended at its center. Outside the glass, dust and ice drift past. Inside, it is forever winter. The globe isn't labeled planet or dwarf planet. It simply exists whole and unchanged, regardless of what someone writes on a plaque. Researchers still wonder if these shifting definitions say more about the cosmos or about us. Every reclassification, every debate reveals something about human priorities. Do we value simplicity over precision or inclusivity over strictness? Do we define to understand or define to control? The lesson Pluto offers is quiet but steady. The universe is not obligated to fit our categories. We can refine our language, draw sharper lines, and invent new terms. But the icy world at the edge of the solar system will continue on its slow path, untouched by any ruling. You drift closer in your thoughts, gliding over that pale surface. You see Sputnik Planitia again, the vast heart-shaped glacier stretching wider than Texas, its nitrogen ice shimmering faintly under the far-off sun. You imagine the glacial plains sighing under their own slow movement, the mountains of water ice casting shadows that barely shift from day to day. The sense of perspective here is overwhelming. Even stripped of the title planet, Pluto holds landscapes unlike anything else we've seen. Strangeness and beauty exist independently of labels. If anything, the act of removing Pluto from the familiar list has forced people to look at it more closely, to see not just a category, but a place. A memory drifts back from earlier sections of your journey. The young girl who named Pluto, the countless nights when schoolchildren traced it in star charts, the spacecraft that traveled for nearly a decade to greet it. None of that changes because a committee wrote new rules. In a way, those stories might matter more than the classification itself. You linger here for a while, letting the thoughts settle like dust on frost. Pluto is both what science says it is and what the human heart chooses to see. Those two truths can exist together without canceling each other out. They can orbit each other, like Pluto and its moon Charon, locked in a slow, endless dance. The dance between Pluto and Charon turns slowly, almost too slow for the eye to follow. Their orbits are locked in a tidal embrace, each showing the other the same face forever. You imagine standing on Pluto's icy plain, watching Charon hang motionless in the sky, while the stars behind it slide past at an imperceptible pace. This is the end of the outward journey, not because the mystery is solved, but because you've reached the place where the mystery rests in its own stillness. The question of planet feels smaller here, like a shadow cast on snow. You sense that, out here, the debate matters less than the simple truth of being present with this distant world. One quietly fascinating fact drifts into your awareness. If you could stand on Pluto at noon, the sunlight would be about 900 times dimmer than on Earth, but still bright enough to read by. A soft, twilight brightness that turns every object into muted silver shapes. It's an eerie, otherworldly day that never quite becomes night. Researchers still wonder about the details of Pluto's interior, whether an ocean of liquid water might still slosh deep below its frozen crust, kept warm by the decay of radioactive elements. If such an ocean exists, it could have persisted for billions of years, a hidden sea beneath the ice, untouched by sunlight. That thought lingers like a secret whispered under breath. You let your mind move more slowly now. The edges of thoughts blur. The heartbeat of the solar system is faint here, but steady. You think about all the other places that have been named and renamed, defined and redefined through history. The stars don't need our categories, but we seem to need them. as if every definition is a rope we tie around the drifting to keep it from floating away. And yet, Pluto floats. It has always floated. Perhaps that's the quiet lesson it carries. Not everything we name is ours to hold. You feel the return beginning, not in motion, but in a soft folding inward. The details fade, the mountains, the heart-shaped plain, the debate that echoes through decades. What remains is the sensation of distance, of a horizon so far away it wraps the mind in quiet. Your breathing matches the slow rhythm of Pluto's orbit. Inhale, like the long stretch of years it takes to move a fraction along its path. Exhale, like the centuries of cold air flowing over its plains. The air here, if you could feel it, would be almost nothing, a whisper thinner than the thinnest veil. The light fades a little more, not into darkness, but into a deeper calm. Shadows lengthen across the ice. Somewhere in the invisible distance, the sun is setting for the last time before another week-long night. You let your mind loosen. Images drift by without needing to be held. The slow spin of a frozen moon, the glint of nitrogen frost, the soft gold of sunlight filtered through billions of kilometers. There's no urgency here, no final answer to clutch. Just the comfort of knowing that some questions, like Pluto's place among the planets, can remain open, gently turning without the need to close them. That's all for tonight. Let your mind keep floating or drift into sleep. I'll be here again next time.